Hi, class. Welcome back. You are here because you want to learn about the history of the Gilded Age. This is continuation of the previous model because in the previous model you have learned about history of America, of its industrial growth, rise of America as agricultural giant. So this is kind of like a continuation of that story, if you will. I do wonder if I should cut off my closed captioning so they don't clash with the YouTube's closed captioning, but I'm going to leave them on just in case. Anyways, so today we are continuing with this overarching history of industrialization by specifically looking at the period in American history known as the Gilded Age. And we kind of associate the Gilded Age with the rise of America's big industries, the rise of America's first corporations, the corporate America, right? Meaning big companies with lots of employees, with lots of money, and typically one single person in charge of everything, one big boss in charge of everything. So if you ever wondered where the business moguls of today, like Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk or any other, huge business names you can think of in America, where they got inspiration for their big businesses. They got it in the Gilded Age that kind of starts roughly in the 1870s through the early 1900s, right? So we associate the Gilded Age with big companies amassing a lot of money, but often, these business moguls will be using very questionable ways of going about it, kind of squashing competition in the process and create these large monopolies to be able to control the prices. But if we were to look at the root of the expression, the Gilded Age, the first person to kind of give it a popular title was American author, the writer of fiction stories, the writer of novels. His name was Mark Twain. And in the late 19th century, he actually late 19th century, late 1800s, and then different publications of it in the early 1900s. His name was Mark Twain, and he wrote a story called The Gilded Age, A Tale of Today. And in this story, he uses humor, he uses fictional characters to kind of make a commentary about the state of affairs in America in the late 1800s. And in this novel, he defines the Gilded, right, the Gilded Age as something that's like super fun, super glitzy, super glamorous on the outside. However, if you were to like peel the onion, you would see, if you were to dig in deeper, right, you would see that it's very corrupt. And he thought that this was actually an accurate description of how the policy, of how the business, of how the industry and society worked in America in the 1800s, right? So in the Gilded Age, he characterizes the period of the Gilded Age as, quote, glittering on the surface, but corrupt underneath, right? And in saying this, Mark Twain meant that, while the period is one of during which the extreme wealth was created, that wealth was often acquired in a bad way, like ill-gotten and made through corrupt means. So during the Gilded Age, there was a lot of growth in industry, growth of technology, which was, you can say, good for American economy. It was good in terms of creation of jobs. It was good for those few 1% people on top who were the bosses of these big companies. But as you can imagine, again, as you peel in the onion a bit deeper, the Gilded Age also had a more sinister side, in that it was a period that will create the environment for the growth of often greedy, often corrupt industrialists, corrupt bankers, corrupt politicians. And sometimes to explain this better, a picture or this definition of what the Gilded Age means and represents in American history picture is worth 1,000 words, right? So if you look at the political cartoon on the slide, it's basically a negative commentary of the Gilded Age. So take a look at the political cartoon and think about what you see. So think about who's on the bottom, think about who's on top, right? So on the bottom, so we see this kind of floating, moving body on the water. That is on the bottom, we see regular people, the workers, and on top, we see money bags, right? And we see people sitting on top of these money bags, right? These are the actual cartoonish representations of some of the people, industrialists of the time, like Cyrus Field, Jay Glaude, Cornelius Vanderbilt, and Russell Sage. So again, the Gilded Age is an era that would enable business people to build America's large corporations at the expense of those who are on the bottom of the working class, right? And subsequently, then, the Gilded Age, or during Gilded Age, for that reason, we will see a lot of these people on the bottom uplifting those people sitting on the bags of money. We will see those workers fighting for better working conditions through America's first labor unions, right? You will read about this in some of the other module readings, right? About the rise of the labor unions, which was necessary because the workers were treated so badly by these wealthy industrialists. But the focus of this video will mainly be to look at some early developments of the Gilded Age, some of the business accomplishments and methods that these business moguls will come to represent in the Gilded Age. Now, firstly, we said that the Gilded Age was associated with like this boom in economy, boom in industry, and there would be a specific set of factors that would enable this to happen, or that which will make the growth of businesses possible. And the first factor enabling this economic success will be the plentiful natural resources we already had in America. So think of iron ore, think of limestone, think of coal, think of bison, think of gold. All of these resources don't really require a lot of harvesting or a lot of planting and seasons after seasons taking care of it. They're naturally available to us in the nature, right? Of course, enabling the growth of wealth. Couple this with the rapid growth of population, right? Both people born in America as well as the immigrants, people from across the world coming to America. Why? Because they want jobs, they want job security, and the industries in America are booming at the time. So we see the growth of population specifically in the American cities, right? And another, if not the most important link in this chain of the business growth is something called lack of government regulation, or lack of government regulation of the market, or the limited government intervention in the economy. So meaning government will not be having a lot of say. There will not be a lot of laws made by the government telling the business people how to run their businesses, right? So during the Gilded Age, there was a very limited government intervention, very limited involvement of government in the economy, which of course is going to help the growth of the wealthy capitalists, right? So to give you an example, there was no personal or there was no corporate taxes based on person's income, right? So the business people are able to accumulate enormous fortunes without worrying too much which tax bracket they will have to fall under. So what this means is that, for example, there was no government policy saying, if you make $1 million per year, you need to pay more taxes than the person who is making less money, say $20,000 a year, right? Meaning all people were paying the same income tax regardless of what their yearly income was. So naturally, people are encouraged to make more and more money without the fear of being overly taxed if they happen to make more money than those who don't, right? Other examples of limited government intervention also mean that there were no government agencies in control of the working conditions. There were no federal standards, meaning standards applying for every state of maximum work hours, maximum amount of hours you can work per day. There were no limits on how many hours workers can work per week. There were no laws to set the limits on the working hours. There were no requirements for workers' insurance. So the business people did not have to provide insurance for the workers, like health insurance or even insurance for injury. So what happens to you if you get injured at work, right? There was no law saying, oh, government has to pay you money or give you sick leave time for you to recover if you get injured at the workplace. Today, thankfully, we have these standards, but back in the Gilded Age, these laws and standards were not existing, meaning that the employers can get away with underpaying their workers, overworking their workers, and not having to guarantee extra money, extra pay if they are not working for the reasons of them being sick or being injured at work, right? So we can see how that system may be exploitative or abusing for your everyday average worker. Yeah, lastly, going back to the factors that contribute to the expansion of the businesses during the Gilded Age, an important one was encouraging the spirit of innovation, encouraging the application of new science, new breakthrough discoveries to make production in these factories more efficient. And one of the best ways that this was done, or one of the biggest examples of how one invention, one discovery changed how things are being produced in America, changed how more productive we are at the factories, was the application of electricity. So during the 1800s, electricity becomes widely accessible to people, which of course changes how people fuel their homes, meaning with electricity, having lights inside of the house, having heat with electricity, and also how we may rely on electricity to increase productivity in the factories and also apply electricity in public transportation. And to be more specific, when it comes to electricity, a very important person, inventor of the Gilded Age, was American inventor Thomas Edison. And he was the one that came up with this breakthrough and life changing set of innovations, including the light bulb. There is still, you can buy at the store, you can purchase the so called Edison light bulb, the first light bulb available to people. So people no longer have to use candles or liquid kerosene to fuel their homes. Also, he will invent machines that distribute electricity, that distribute electric power, and or the so-called electric generating stations. So these big machines, these big facilities that produce power and transmit or transport power to individual consumers. And the first electric generating station was opened in New York, in Manhattan in 1889. And it's going to provide electricity to power things like public transportation, streetcars powered by electricity, right? But also, again, powering the factories, powering the private homes as well. And eventually, Edison is going to collaborate with other businessmen looking for investors, with other scientists in America to create the so called General Electric Company, still existing today. You may have heard of the company called the GE. And today, GE mainly sells like a small appliances for household and also generates electricity. But in the 1890s, when this factory first opened, it was selling mainly electrical equipment. So stuff that you need to transmit electricity. So we think of the GE as America's and world's first electric company. However, aside from Edison, there will be another inventor to even more so revolutionize the so called electric age, and his name was Nikola Tesla. And Tesla was born in a small country in southeastern Europe called Croatia. Guess who else happens to be from that country? Anyways, he will come to America in the 1880s. He decides to move there because he was invented to work with Thomas Edison in his lab in Manhattan. So Tesla was supposed to help Edison with the inventions in electricity. And Edison promised that he would pay Nikola Tesla $50,000 if Tesla can improve design of Edison's electrical systems. So meaning these systems that will, transmit electricity to the people. And after months of experiments, Tesla says, voila, I have this solution to your problem. But Edison refuses to pay Tesla for the work and for the inventions that the Tesla presented Edison with. And at this point, right, we have two scientists, we have two great inventors in America who found themselves in disagreement over whose type of electricity is better. And that's why they kind of will part ways later in their careers, right? Because the type of electric power favored by Edison is called direct current. And the type of electricity that was favored by Nikola Tesla, or discovered by Tesla, I should rather say, is called the alternating current. Okay. And without bothering you too much with the physics behind all of this, admittedly, I'm not the expert in that field, but the way I understand this disagreement is we can say that with Edison's direct current, the power or electricity kind of flows continuously in like this one single line. It flows in one direction. And while this is great, while this does supply electricity to the people, it was limited because you basically have to have these huge power plants with these huge generators stationed every couple of miles so they can give the electricity to the people who are within this 2-mile radius, right? Which is different from the alternating current. Again, the one favored by Nikola Tesla. Because with the alternating current, the power, instead of the electricity, instead of flowing in this continuous single line, it kind of flows in multiple directions. It kind of flows backwards and forwards, meaning it it produces more power, and it's also able to travel longer distances. So, specifically, Tesla's alternating current was able to distribute electricities to a distance of over 20 miles. So, it's faster, it's more efficient because it supplies electricity to more people in longer distances, right? So, Tesla was essentially fired by Edison, or Edison refuses to pay Tesla because Tesla said that his invention of alternating current was better than Thomas Edison's direct current. And Edison, of course, disagrees. He has more money, more power, more investors, so he fires Tesla. However, Tesla keeps working. He eventually finds investors to support his research. He discovers that the power of moving the water could also be a great source to produce electricity, right? So for that purpose, Tesla is going to supervise the building of the first hydroelectric power plant in the world, and of course in America. This power plant was stationed at Niagara Falls, or using the power of Niagara Falls in the upstate New York, near the city of Buffalo, to produce electricity. And of course, it's going to use the alternating current to distribute the electricity at distances of 20 miles away, which again was previously impossible to achieve such long distance with Thomas Edison's direct current alone, right? So Nikola Tesla's discovery of the alternating current will make this distribution of electric power possible and more accessible to the greater number of people. And he will use this Niagara Falls Power Company station in Buffalo, New York, using the power of water to prove that this is a better and more efficient way of transmitting electricity, right? So in terms of innovative spirit, Tesla's discoveries are going to fuel the industries, the power plants of the Gilded Age. Before I end this short video, I will just say that you're looking at the image on the slide on the top. You're looking at the image of Tesla sitting under what's called the Tesla coil, which is basically a machine that is able to produce extremely high voltages of power. So again, this story was important to us because we are trying to explain what factors enabled the growth of the Gilded Age. Electricity and science inventions were one of them, and this was one of the examples of that. So this was a brief summary of what it means to, live in the Gilded Age and what factors enabled the growth of that era. And then in the next video, you're going to see some examples of the business moguls who will take advantage of these factors and create America's first monopolies.